In March of 1991, the country of Sierra Leone was plunged into an 11-year civil war when fighters of the Revolutionary United Front, the RUF, launched a war from the east of the country near the border with Liberia in order to overthrow the government. At the time, the RUF rebel group was under the leadership of Foday Sankoh. During this period, Foday Sankoh had a close relationship with the Liberian warlord turned president, Charles Taylor. They had met in Libya at one of Muammar Gaddafi's training camps for revolutionary movements on the continent. In fact, Charles Taylor's troops accompanied the RUF rebels when they invaded Sierra Leone. This civil war in Sierra Leone resulted in the death of an estimated 50,000 people, as well as the displacement of over 500,000 people. In this episode of African Biographics, we cover the grim story of Sierra Leone's Revolutionary United Front and their leader, Foday Sankoh. So this was the state of affairs in Sierra Leone at the time. The country was in a fragile position after gaining its independence from Britain in 1961. In the 30 years ranging from 1961 to 1991, successive post-colonial governments could not provide clean water, dependable electricity, decent education, or affordable health services to most of the masses in the country. The dominant regime, called the All People's Congress Party, also repressed its opponents, conducted fraudulent elections, and fostered a culture of corruption and impunity in Sierra Leone. So the environment in the country was rife for disaffected young people to stand up and pose a challenge to the administration of President Joseph Momo. This is where Foday Sankoh and the RUF came into the picture. Foday Sankoh was born on the 17th of October 1937 in the northern part of Sierra Leone. He joined the Sierra Leone Army in 1956, 5 years before the nation gained independence from the British. In 1971, while he was a corporal in the Sierra Leone Army, Foday Sankoh was expelled and imprisoned for 7 years at the Pademba Road prison in Freetown. This was because he had participated in a mutiny against the government. Upon his release from prison, Foday Sankoh worked as a wedding and portrait photographer and as a cameraman for the state television service in the south and east of Sierra Leone. It was here where he first encountered young anti-government radicals who felt aggrieved by the government of Sierra Leone. This group of young students recruited Foday Sankoh into their movement. This is the point where the seeds were sown for the later formation of the RUF. So Foday Sankoh and other Sierra Leoneans were recruited for military training in Benghazi, Libya, for an armed revolution against the regime of President Joseph Momo. This was in 1987. In this group of radicals, Foday Sankoh was at least a decade older than most of his contemporaries, and they referred to him as Pa or Papi. While there, Sankoh and two other trainees, Abu Kanu and Rashid Mansouri, met and befriended Charles Taylor, who was the head of the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, the NPFL. Charles Taylor had started his own revolution against Samuel Doe's regime in Liberia in 1989. So in this regard, Foday Sankoh helped Taylor launch the Liberian Civil War on Christmas Eve of 1989. The war-ravaged nation of Liberia gave Foday Sankoh and his fellow comrades a fertile recruiting ground and a launching pad for their revolution in Sierra Leone. Foday Sankoh returned to Sierra Leone in 1991, and with the help of Abu Kanu and Rashid Mansouri, the crew formed the Revolutionary United Front, the RUF. At the time, the government of Joseph Momo was widely perceived by its citizens as being corrupt and having caused widespread unemployment in Sierra Leone. So it came as no surprise that in the beginning, the RUF was popular with some citizens in Sierra Leone. This is because in the beginning, Foday Sankoh promised many improvements, such as free healthcare and public education, as well as a share of the diamond revenues. And this was if he managed to overthrow the incumbent government. So the RUF began its operations on the 23rd of March 1991 when it launched its first attack of the civil war in villages in the diamond-rich eastern province of Sierra Leone. Unfortunately, as the RUF control spread, so did reports of widespread atrocities. When the RUF troops attacked a town, they usually tore it down, burning schools, hospitals, and homes. Those captured were forced to work as slaves for the RUF, and women were often forced into sexual slavery. Foday Sankoh personally ordered most of the operations under the title Operation Pay Yourself. Under this operation, he encouraged his troops to loot anything they could find. Eventually, Sankoh's allies, Rashid Mansaray and Abu Kanu, complained of Foday Sankoh's brutal tactics. Well, unsurprisingly, both these gentlemen were summarily executed. By 1992, Foday Sankoh and the RUF had gained control of many of Sierra Leone's diamond fields. However, contrary to what he had promised, Foday Sankoh used the proceeds from the diamond revenues not for the betterment of the citizens, but to buy military supplies for Charles Taylor and himself. These actions over the next 4 years tanked the country's economy and led to starvation for many of its people. When the RUF started gaining momentum, President Momo was caught off guard, and so he had to quickly come up with a plan to counter this insurgency. So he doubled the size of the army from 3,000 men to almost 6,000. However, this didn't work out as planned for Momo. Because of corruption and mismanagement, Sierra Leone's frontline troops were badly underpaid and demoralized, and this came back to bite Joseph Momo. This is because in April of 1992, a group of the Sierra Leone army from the Eastern Front traveled to Freetown, the capital, to protest their situation. Within a day, this mutiny became a coup and Joseph Momo fled to Guinea. A military junta, the National Provisional Ruling Council, was formed, with the young Captain Valentine Stresser as chairman. Stresser became the youngest head of state in the world at just 25 years old. In the first half of 1994, the RUF intensified its violent campaign, and in response, the government of Stresser launched a total war on the RUF as the conflict spread to the northern part of the country. This period of fighting had made it impossible to carry out the voter registration needed for a referendum on the draft constitution in preparation for a return to civilian rule. Further widespread fighting occurred through much of the country early in 1995, and the RUF appeared able to strike at will. They overran the bauxite and rutile mines and seized hostages. The closure of these mines deprived the government of about 70% of its export earnings, and many thousands of people fled to Guinea to become refugees. In February of that year, however, government forces retook the Sierra rutile mine from the rebels. At the time, this mine was the largest employer in the country. The Stresser administration was hesitant to enter into negotiations with the RUF. They claimed that the RUF was acting as a pawn for Charles Taylor's movement in Liberia. Their argument was that there was great uncertainty as to why the violent outbreak against the government had occurred at all and just what the RUF represented. A common theory was that the RUF had been created or sponsored by Charles Taylor in order to undermine the Sierra Leone government. This was because the government of Sierra Leone had supported an ECOWAS intervention in Liberia. But anyways, by mid-1995, Captain Valentine Stresser started seeking a peace settlement with the RUF. But the RUF continued its violent raids, and in mid-December 1995, it attacked a village that was only 65 kilometers from Freetown. By this time, the government had expanded the army to 13,000, and the war was taking up to 75% of budget revenues. Yet, despite this huge effort, the government was unable to contain the RUF, let alone defeat it. So as a result, the government turned to the mercenary firm Executive Outcomes as well as Russian helicopter crews for military assistance. The mercenaries' price for their services included a substantial share of the country's diamond mines. Although the mercenaries' 21-month stint in Sierra Leone cost the country $35 million, they managed to get the job done. The RUF rebels were smashed and confined to small pockets of the country. The diamond fields were secured, and Foday Sankoh was forced to the negotiating table in order to discuss allowing free elections. Now, although a meeting of the government and the RUF was held in Abidjan in the Ivory Coast on 2 December 1995, the RUF refused to take part in the elections that were planned for February of 1996 without first obtaining an end to government hostilities and the withdrawal from Sierra Leone of the foreign mercenaries and foreign troops. On 16 January 1996, a bloodless coup was mounted to topple Valentine Stresser and replace him briefly with Brigadier General Julius Maada Bio, who was also a member of Stresser's NPRC. This is because they were not satisfied with Valentine Stresser's handling of the peace process, and they also feared that he would not transfer power to a civilian government, as originally promised. So elections for a return to civilian rule were held in February of 1996. Ahmed Tejan Kaba of the Sierra Leone's People's Party was installed as president in March of 1996. His administration then went on to broker negotiations with Foday Sankoh and RUF, and they happened throughout most of the year 1996. The parties finally signed a peace agreement on 30 November 1996, and this agreement was known as the Abidjan Agreement. The Abidjan Agreement covered an immediate ceasefire, the disarming of the RUF, and its reconstitution as a political party. It soon became clear, however, that the promised peace was unlikely to work. The peace negotiations in the Ivory Coast had surprisingly given Foday Sankoh more legitimacy with his cause. He was also absolved of responsibility for his past activities. So when Foday Sankoh saw that his military strength had increased and that he had more leverage, he and his forces resumed attacks and broke off the peace agreement. The rebels were unwilling to disarm, and Foday Sankoh declared that there was no trust and confidence between him and the government. Also, what gave Foday Sankoh more confidence was that Western powers had advised the Kaba administration to cut off its ties with the mercenaries because their role in the civil war was distasteful. So the government of Kaba complied with this in early 1997. So this turn of events gave the RUF rebels impetus to further wreak havoc in the country. So the Kaba administration came up with a plan in order to sabotage the RUF. They colluded with Nigeria's military government to arrest Foday Sankoh on arms possession charges. So Foday Sankoh was arrested on these charges at the Murtala Mohammed Airport in Lagos, Nigeria on the 12th of March 1997. The government also then supported the attempt by some senior members of the RUF War Council who had been more supportive of the Abidjan Agreement to replace the arrested Foday Sankoh as the leader. But this attempt failed after Sam Bokari, also referred to as General Mosquito, whom Foday Sankoh had anointed as the interim leader, arrested these members of the RUF War Council. This effectively ended any opportunity for the legitimization of the RUF under the Abidjan Peace Accord. On Foday Sankoh's advice, Sam Bokari established strong ties with Charles Taylor, who at that time was now the president of Liberia. Charles Taylor provided Bokari and the new interim RUF leadership with facilities and communications equipment in Monrovia, the capital of Liberia, and Charles Taylor claimed that this was in order to facilitate the organization's peace efforts. In reality, these facilities became the base for the RUF leadership to work jointly with Charles Taylor in training and equipping the RUF, as well as to plan attacks in Sierra Leone and exploit revenues from Sierra Leone's diamond mines. Sierra Leone was thrown into further chaos because the government of Ahmed Kaba lasted no longer than 14 months. What transpired was that on the 25th of May 1997, a group of 20 soldiers stormed Freetown's Pademba Road prison where they released Major Johnny Paul Koroma. Major Koroma was a dissident officer who was being held in prison in connection with a coup plot. So this group seized the radio station and announced the formation of the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, the AFRC. they said that the AFRC was now in charge of Sierra Leone. Thousands of soldiers wearing red shirts and bandanas roamed Freetown, looting and shooting people at will. Marauding gangs ransacked supermarkets, offices, banks, shops, and private houses. Given this turn of events, President Ahmed Kaba fled to nearby Guinea. Foreigners were evacuated, and thousands of civilians headed for exile. Freetown became a rundown city. To add insult to injury, Koroma's group had no clear strategy other than to seize power. They declared that the civil war was over. The AFRC also naively invited the RUF to join it and form a People's Army. Foday Sankoh, who was in Nigeria awaiting charges of illegal possession of arms, endorsed this move, and the acting RUF commander, Sam Bokari, moved his forces into Freetown. When the RUF forces arrived in Freetown, looting, rape and murder quickly followed. So in February of 1998, ECOMOG soldiers forced the AFRC and the RUF out of Freetown in a fierce battle that took the lives of many civilians. The ECOMOG soldiers managed to restore President Kaba to office. A total of 47 individuals were convicted of treason and other charges associated with the AFRC and the RUF administration, and they were sentenced to death. Foday Sankoh, who had been arrested in Nigeria and returned to Sierra Leone, was also tried, found guilty, and sentenced to death. But although ECOMOG secured some of the larger towns in the north and eastern part of the country, it could not decisively defeat the AFRC or the RUF. By January of 1999, Sierra Leone was in dire straits, and world leaders intervened to promote negotiations between the RUF and the government. Foday Sankoh was freed to participate in these peace talks. These negotiations started in Lomé, the capital of Togo. The Lomé Peace Agreement was signed on July 7, 1999, and this agreement proposed a power-sharing plan that included Sankoh and other rebels in the government and required the RUF and the AFRC forces to surrender their weapons. The Lomé Agreement also gave Foday Sankoh the vice presidency of Sierra Leone as well as control of the country's diamond mines in return for a cessation of the fighting and the deployment of a United Nations peacekeeping force to monitor the disarmament process. Unfortunately, the international community failed to read the glaring signs that the RUF had no intention of laying down the weapons that were the source of their political and economic power. With the RUF's unchallenged control of the diamond fields, these precious stones flowed out through Charles Taylor, and weapons flowed into Sierra Leone through Liberia. At the same time, there was continuing violent clashes in the northern part of the country. 6,000 United Nations peacekeepers arrived in Sierra Leone to help with the peacekeeping efforts. However, by the beginning of the year 2000, it was obvious that the civil war had not come to an end. If anything, it looked set to become even worse. In February, the deterioration in relations between the different sides in the Sierra Leone civil war persuaded the United Nations to increase the number of peacekeepers to 11,000. And this made it the largest peacekeeping force in the world at that time. The Lomé Peace Agreement had collapsed by May of 2000 when the RUF abducted 500 United Nations peacekeepers, an action which led to full-scale fighting between the RUF and the Sierra Leone army. When an angry mob marched on Foday Sankoh's heavily guarded home to demand the peacekeepers' freedom, the RUF guards opened fire, killing 12 people. Foday Sankoh fled but was captured a week later when he crept back to his home to try and recover a large packet of diamonds he had left behind. With the arrest of Foday Sankoh, the RUF disintegrated. On 18 January 2002, the devastating 11-year civil conflict in Sierra Leone officially ended when all the parties to the conflict issued a declaration of the end of the war. The RUF insurgents, who had fought successive governments since 1991, completed disarmament and demobilization. Foday Sankoh was handed over to the British. He was indicted on 17 counts for various war crimes, including the use of child soldiers and crimes against humanity. On July 29, 2003, Foday Sankoh died of complications from a stroke while awaiting trial. He was 65 years old. In the Sierra Leone Civil War, about 50,000 people were killed, and more than 500,000 people were displaced, and the nation's infrastructure was destroyed. But the story does not end here, and it is not all doom and gloom. Sierra Leone has been on a path of healing, and this country represents one of the most successful cases of peacekeeping and peace building. Many years later, after the declared cessation of this conflict in 2002, the country has remained relatively stable and is moving on from this dark chapter. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.